Now, today is, of course, Good Friday. Now, for some, that means a long weekend to enjoy and a bank holiday. For others, it is a day of sombre reflection and one of the most holy days of the year. The Prime Minister is going to deliver an Easter message over this weekend. Last year, he talked about the importance of Christian values, which he said were embedded in British life. But Mr. Sunak is, of course, the first practising Hindu Prime Minister in British history, and he has discussed how important his faith is in his life.
I'm a proud Hindu, and that's how I was raised, that's how I am. Having faith to give you resilience, to give you strength is important, and it provides an outlook on life which I find particularly valuable.
The majority of Prime Ministers, though, have been avowed Christians. Here are just a few examples.
I believe that by taking together these key elements from the Old and New Testaments, we gain a view of the universe, a proper attitude to work, and principles to shape economic and social life.
In this new world, how religious faith develops will have a profound impact.
This is a Christian country. Yes, we're a nation that embraces, welcomes and accepts all faiths and none, but we're still a Christian country.
Our Christian heritage is something we can all be proud of.
Well, Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, David Cameron and Theresa May speaking there. And earlier I spoke to Father Mark Vickers, who is a Roman Catholic priest and author of the book God in Number 10. He told me about the personal faith of those who have been in Number 10 and how that may have influenced politics over the last century.
Well, my book covers the 20th century, and the thing which surprised me was during the century as a whole, obviously Britain became a much less Christian country so far, and figures held up pretty well into the 1960s. Then there was gradual decline, which became precipitous from the 1990s. You'd have expected the Prime Ministers to have followed that trend. In fact, I discovered that wasn't the case at all. So far, in the first half of the 20th century, most of them were either skeptics or bonkers, seances and all kinds of strange things. And then it changes from sort of Macmillan onwards. Almost without exception, they would all have described themselves as Christian. And in many cases, they backed that up with in terms of religious practice. So they really bucked the national trend. Yes, faith was very important for many of them. So Macmillan, Douglas Hume, Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair. So they were a much more Christian lot than you'd expect.
Who was the earlier one who had seances?
It wasn't just one. So Arthur Balfour, Tory Prime Minister at the beginning of the century, was having seances in Downing Street. So Ramsay MacDonald, First Labour Prime Minister, was attending seances. Clem Attlee's wife had a seance in Downing Street. Churchill had a private astrologer. So a lot of them were quite nuts at the beginning of the 20th century.
But as you say, since the Second World War, they've been rather more observant. Of course, we've got an established church in this country, so participating in Christianity goes with the job to a certain extent, doesn't it?
Yes and no. So they have a role, or they certainly had a role until quite recently. So Gordon Brown stepped back, and up until Gordon Brown, they had a role in the appointments of Anglican bishops, Church of England bishops, whether they were Christian or Anglican or not. And to be fair, even the ones who weren't observant Christians were very conscientious about their establishment duties. So you get people like Clement Attlee, who was probably verging on an atheist, but he took the role of the church very seriously.
Yeah. I mean, Mrs. Thatcher famously came from a Methodist background,
yes,
and she very much championed those values. Was that a sort of different sort of Christianity, perhaps rather more utilitarian than we'd had previously?
It was a very moral kind of Christianity. So people forget how Christian her background was. Her father was a Methodist lay preacher. Margaret Thatcher herself, as an undergraduate, was a lay preacher during her time at Oxford. It was a different kind of Christianity to these establishment bishops. She famously crossed swords with them a number of times in the 1980s. I think that was a missed opportunity. She wanted to have a conversation. I think there were justifiable criticisms of her policies, obviously, but she wanted to have dialogue. So, for example, she invited the Anglican bishops to lunch at Chequers, wanted to discuss the underlying ideas of Christianity. The bishops were emphasizing love. She was emphasizing freedom. And you just felt sometimes they were talking a different language. And to be fair to the Anglican bishops, one or two of them afterwards said they weren't particularly fair to her. They should have listened to her more. So if she wanted to have a discussion, she was up for an argument. And if you could hold your own with Margaret Thatcher, she would take it on board.
She got into trouble, though, didn't she, when she raised the parable of the Good Samaritan?
She got into a lot of trouble. She got into trouble. She went off to talk to the Scots, the Church of Scotland, the General Assembly in Edinburgh, I think 1988. And so she was felt to be lecturing them, giving them a Sunday school lecture. And that didn't go down very well at all.
Mind you, it's a fair point, though, that the Good Samaritan was able to help because he had resources.
It's an entirely fair point. And that's the problem. I think people should have been much more robust with Margaret Thatcher. She picked up some ideas. She was missing quite a lot as well. So Charles Moore, in his biography, said there were some pretty basic elements of church practice, like baptisms. It's not at all clear that she understood what she was doing for the children. But she was up for a discussion, and I think it was a missed opportunity by church leaders not to engage her more rigorously.
Now, Tony Blair, he held off converting to Catholicism from Anglicanism until after he left Downing Street. When I asked him about it later, I said he would have been the first Catholic political leader since Henry VIII. He just laughed. But it was quite a big deal, wasn't it? That's why
it was a very big deal, and he was nervous about it. It was a gradual decision on his part. He'd say, look, I've been moving in this direction for 25 years since I married Cherise. I go to a Catholic church with the family. That's important to me. He held off for various reasons, and he said it was going to be more trouble than it was worth if he was in office. He'd get all kinds of questions which would divert him from policy issues. There were still very much at that time there were the things on the statute book which would have been problematic, about Catholics advising the Queen as head of the Supreme Governor of the Church of England. It would have been problematic in terms of the Northern Irish peace process, although, interestingly, he got on like a house on fire with Ian Paisley, on the other end of the Christian spectrum. But
it's interesting, too. He actually had Protestant Northern Irish antecedents, grandparents.
Yeah, and people don't realise that, so they assume that he's rather posh Anglo-Scots. In fact, he's half English and half Protestant Irish, and his mother's family were farmers from County Donegal, deeply, deeply Protestant. His grandfather was in charge of the local Orange Lodge. His grandmother made him promise not to marry a Catholic. And I wonder, I think Tony Blair was a curious mixture of rebel and conformist, and I just wonder whether he didn't get a slight kick out of the fact when he became a Catholic, how the reaction of his Irish Protestant antecedents and his own atheist father.
I mean, oddly, he said to me that he was a Christian, he wanted to worship with his family, and frankly, he didn't see much difference between Catholics and Protestants.
He certainly emphasised ecumenism, and there would be some Catholics who would say, come on, becoming a Catholic, certainly in adult life, is a major step. We share a huge amount. We share the most important things, obviously, but there are things which distinguish Catholics. And he has been challenged since he became a Catholic, on some of those issues. And it's interesting. There were only two living prime ministers of the 20th century prime ministers I wrote about. One was John Major, the other was Tony Blair. I didn't expect John Major to be interested. In fact, I contacted him during the middle of lockdown. He said, well, I prefer not to meet, but I got 9 pages of spiritual musings from John Major, which I wasn't expecting. He wanted to engage. Tony Blair, I thought it was going to be possible to meet, but he chose not to. And I'd have wanted to pursue some of those issues of Catholic teaching, which are distinctive, and say, come on, where does this sit after your conversion?
Well, of course, his advisor, Alistair Campbell, famously said we don't do God, and he certainly didn't want to do God as an atheist himself. Now, today, we've got Rishi Sunak, who is a practicing Hindu. Does that lie easily with a basically Christian country?
Well, there's a question, isn't it? Are we a basically Christian country? And I think up until the 1990s, it would have been difficult to have conceived of a Muslim or Hindu in Downing Street. I think that it's indicative of where we are a generation on. It doesn't seem to have caused any problems whatsoever, as far as I can tell. you're right, and he says that he takes faith very seriously. I have no reason to doubt that. He is an observant Hindu. He's also very open to Christianity. He went to Winchester, where he would have certainly got a good Christian formation. I'm told that he's happy going to the local Anglican church up in his constituency. So, no, I don't think his Hinduism has been any problem at all.
And do you, as a religious person, a Christian, sort of feel any common cause with other religions, be they Hindu or Judaism or indeed Islam?
Well, I think it's possible to have more common cause with someone from another faith than someone who is of no faith or certainly hostile to faith. And we share certain values. We believe that there is more than this life. We believe in the spiritual nature of human beings, more than just flesh and blood. We believe that we're answerable to a higher power. So within limits, yes, I feel more comfortable sort of talking to people of other faith than those who are hostile to faith. And
giving that, might it be time to disestablish the Church of England to embrace other faiths?
Well, those are two separate questions, really. So, and it's a question for the Crown and the Church of England, whether the Church is disestablished. So, how you would incorporate other faiths in some form of establishment, I'm not sure. So, I think as Catholics, we wouldn't look to do that. So, we have a prohibition against bishops, priests being involved in the executive. We think there should be a healthy distance. And
they can't even join the House of Lords, can they?
Exactly, and I wouldn't want to see that changed. I think it's easier sometimes to speak from the outside.
And looking ahead, or speculating rather, what do we know about Keir Starmer and God?
Well, we know because he made a statement, I think 3 years ago, that he is an atheist. And if he's elected, for the next few months, then he would be the first avowed atheist in Downing Street.
So where would that leave him in participating in national church services? Would that make him a hypocrite?
No, I don't think so. We have plenty of people in the church here, Sunday by Sunday, who aren't Catholics. Everyone is welcome, and obviously, they should participate to the extent to which they feel comfortable. My concern isn't so much that you have an atheist, a non-believer in Downing Street. It's what's their level of theological literacy. And I think that's where things have changed over the last 2 or 3 generations. Even those who had a weak faith or no faith in the past, you could have a conversation with them. So people like Clement Attlee, they knew what Christianity was about. They knew what mattered to the church. And you could have a constructive dialogue. I think the problem today is whether people think of themselves as Christian or not. And it's not just limited to non-believers. The theological understanding is much, much diminished, and that's problematic.
It's interesting, isn't it? Keir Starmer says he's an atheist, yet at home he also says his family observes some Jewish traditions because his wife is Jewish.
Yeah, and he said he's very respectful of faith. If that's the case, then there oughtn't to be a problem.
Now, here we are at Easter, which to some people is a double bank holiday. And of course, it includes the most somber day in the Christian calendar today, Good Friday, and then the most celebrated day on Easter Sunday. What's one thought you'd like all our politicians to take away today?
Be open to the spiritual side of human nature. We talk about it in other language today. We talk about mental health. Realise that human beings are more than flesh and blood, that we're concerned with more than just economics. Yes, we have to care for the body, but there's a whole other aspect of the human person which must be cared for as well. And without that other aspect, I'd say that there is a diminished understanding of joy and meaning and purpose in life. And I think people, whether they have articulated that or not, it's what they experience. So please be open to that, and please be open to what people of faith have to offer.
Father Mark, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That was Mark Vickers, author of God in Number 10. I'm Adam Bolton, in for Matt Chorley on Times Radio in association with Revolut. Download the free app. It's for 18+, and terms and conditions apply.
The World in 10 podcast is your essential 10-minute daily roundup of all the biggest stories from across the globe.
I'm Alex Dibble from The Times. Every day we sit down and go through the stories being broken by our correspondents across the world.
If he can be assassinated by India, what does that leave me as someone who's just his son?
After she was raped by Epstein, she ran.
10 minutes to stay on top of the world. Subscribe for free now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your preferred podcast provider.
At Asda, we've got Easter sorted. Come for the chalky eggs and stay for our succulent tender leg of lamb. Was $11.50 per kilo, now $5.70 per kilo. That's better than half price. Kind of a big deal. Even better, it's been taste approved by the Good Housekeeping Institute.
Oh, don't mind if I do.
Asda, that's more like it. Selected stores, subject to availability. Offer ends 2nd of April.
Say good day to great flight deals to Australia with Singapore Airlines. Explore Australia's most iconic and breathtaking destinations and travel there in award-winning comfort and style. Fly from London Gatwick, Heathrow or Manchester to Singapore and seamlessly connect to 7 Australian gateway cities. Book your flight today at singaporeair.com/flyaustralia. Come and say good day.
Listen to Times Radio on your smart speaker. Just say, play Times Radio.
Times Radio with Revolut. Download the app for free and find out why over 8 million people in the UK have signed up to Revolut. 18 plus, terms and conditions apply.
Adam Bolton here on Times Radio this Good Friday, in for Matt Chorley. And we're discussing the significance of Christianity in British political life. Should Christianity really have any bearing still on our politics? Joining me now is Paul Bickley, who's the head of political engagement at the Theos think tank, which studies the role of religion in society, and Stephen Evans, the chief executive at the National Secular Society. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Paul, let's start with the question of just how far Christianity does have a role in our society. Is it still significant?
Well, as a matter of fact, it does. I mean, with your previous guest, you were talking about the role of faith in the Constitution and in the life of prime ministers. But we also know that there are still lots of people of faith that are citizens. It's part of their reasoning. It's part of where politics starts for them. I think all politics starts with principle. And sometimes that's religious principle. For religious people, that's where they're getting it from. Of course, you quickly have to move on to the pragmatic questions of how you get things done. And we see in politics that lots of people of faith are interested in being involved. MPs, councillors, party members. It's part of what they bring to work. It's usually a good thing. And it also influences how people vote.
Stephen, what do you think? I mean, should we pay attention to people's political faith?
No, I think we're successful as a country because we don't pay too much attention to people's their faith. You're talking about us having a Hindu prime minister, and I think the wonderful thing about that is nobody really cares. I think we are very comfortable with religious diversity in this country, and that's really to our credit. We're very much at ease with that. What we don't like is religion being imposed upon us. So if, for the sake of example, Rishi Sunak or any other prime minister use their position to impose their faith on us, that wouldn't go down very well at all with the British public. So, yeah, we're very comfortable with faith. We're comfortable with diversity around us. We just don't like, as a people, I think, to have other people's religion imposed upon us.
Seems to me, Paul, that one of the problems with religion in politics is that it's, historically, it's caused division. And even today, we've got talk of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And if people bring their religious identity into the public arena, it tends to be provocative.
It can be, and we have to just acknowledge that. I think part of it is always with these things we count more readily the errors and the mistakes and the missteps that people make, rather than counting the good things that they do. So, of course, it's true that sometimes it's divisive, but mainly it causes people to pro-social effect, if you like. It makes, generally speaking, when it comes to the Christian population at least, It makes you more likely to vote. It makes you more likely to support charities. It makes you more likely to volunteer. So it's kind of, I think the background is a good thing. Can it cause problems? Yes. I think the quid pro quo for people of faith who want to be involved is to accept that we live in a democracy. So the motivation is there. When you're making an argument, it's no good arguing, as it were, from your own kind of sense of your religious identity or revelation, if you like. You've got to make an argument that works in public for people of all faiths and none. So I think the principle is, Stephen's quite right. We are pretty comfortable. We don't like faith being, as it were, too much there. But in the way that it enhances people's public engagement, it makes them more likely just to kind of want to serve and get involved in public service. That's a good thing. And I don't think people generally oppose that, although there is a little bit of a problem. I think wanting a kind of a society that's fair for all is fine. Sometimes you get in a position where I think the kind of secularist argument is does become slightly anti-religious. So I think the principle is we want a public square that's open to everybody.
I just want to play you something that the Labour MP, the former Labour MP, Frank Field, said to Matt Chorley. Frank Field was, of course, for many years the MP for Birkenhead. He now is living with terminal cancer. And as an active member of the Church of England, he explained why he felt he had to hide his religious beliefs in spite of those being a basis for his personal politics.
Yes, I didn't go around kept saying that, this was an extension of the kingdom, whereby I was genuinely looking at ways of making the world a better place and therefore, in some sense, welcoming the kingdom. I thought I'd look totally cranky if I did that. So I just got on and kept to a secular language in achieving my objectives, which were primarily religious ones. One of the things I was trying to teach the Labour Party, and to a large extent, thank God it's learnt, is that we are of fallen nature and that we live to be redeemed, but we're not redeemed. And that if we forget that there's a dark side to what we get up to, then we can be misleading in the policies that we propose. For a long time, in the 70s, 80s and 90s, Labour was really peddling a belief that we were already home and dry, that human nature didn't really have much part to play, whereas I emphasise that while we are fallen, we can be redeemed.
Stephen, is that how you'd like it? If you have religious beliefs, keep them private, even although they may be motivating your view of the world?
Well, I think that's probably the most sensible thing to do if you want to appeal to people. You've got to remember we are one of the most secular nations on earth now. Just 0.9% of the English population worship in Anglican churches on any given Sunday. Just 1% of young adults say they identify with the Church of England. England and Wales are now minority Christian countries, according to the latest census. And its attitudes too. 81% of us agree that religious practice is a private matter and should be separated from the political and economic life of the country. So despite the UK population having an increasingly secular outlook and an increasingly pluralistic population, we do still have a Church of England that's still officially established as the state church. There's many privileges that flow from that. So I think there's a real disconnect going on at the moment. We've become a very secular society, but I think our political institutions and our national institutions don't reflect that at the moment. So I think we do need a bit of a repositioning of religion in public life to reflect than Britain, and that means separating church and state. I think it would be best for Britain, but I think it would probably be good for the Church of England too, to be honest.
I mean, Paul, we do have the Lord Spiritual, I think up to 26 bishops, including, of course, the Archbishop of Canterbury, playing a role in our legislature as members of the House of Lords. Is that still appropriate in modern-day Britain, do you think?
Well, if we think that the priority problem in the House of Lords is the presence of the bishops, then we'd probably barking up the wrong tree, in my view. I mean, there's a huge argument for a reform of the House of Lords, and a debate around the religious representation would have to be part of that. And it depends what kind of a House of Lords you want. I mean, if you wanted a kind of House of Lords that was a kind of Senate for the regions or civil society representation, then some bishops in the House of Lords makes perfect sense. If you're going for a kind of fully elected democratic chamber, then of course it doesn't make sense. But, you know, the bishops are a kind of humane presence, I think, there. You know, a couple of days ago, I was just checking before the call started, the Bishop of St Albans asked about the impact of the theft of eggs on peregrine falcon populations in the UK. I mean, if we have a fear about their presence being used to impose faith in some way, I think that's... I genuinely think that's mistaken. Of course, I can understand why, on a symbolic level, I'm not an Anglican, and none of the people from, as it were, my faith tradition are represented in the House of Lords. But I suppose they would say that the establishment of the Church of England as a whole, and the presence of the bishops in the House of Lords as a part of that, it kind of is an umbrella for people of all faiths to nestle underneath.
We do get... from the bishops, as you say, a certain level of morality. I think in the House of Lords they tend to vote against the government, although slightly more often when it's a Conservative government than a Labour government. That surely does have, doesn't it, Stephen, a sort of useful element, if you like, in projecting a certain level of sort of moral decency into the national debate?
No, not at all. I think it's really offensive to suggest that, that we need bishops in the House of Lords to morality. I think ordinary peers are equally ethical and as moral as the bishops. And if you look at the Church of England's record on homophobia, they still regard gay sex and same-sex marriage as sinful. They, in unison, they oppose assisted dying laws, to which most people support for reasons of compassion. So, no, if you look at their record on child sex abuse, not just the abuse, but the covering up of abuse, I think it's ridiculous to suggest that they are, we need bishops in there for morality reasons. I think it's completely unjustifiable. I have no problem with religious leaders being in our legislature, but why should they have 26 seats as of right? I mean, this is ridiculous. If we're going to have bishops in the House of Lords, they should be appointed on the same basis as everyone else. In a secular democracy, all of us should be equal before the law, and in Parliament, no religious or political affiliation should give us any sort of advantages or disadvantages. So I think there's really no justifiable reason for 26 seats being reserved as of right for Anglican bishops.
Stephen and Paul, thank you both very much indeed, and some comments in on that. The Church is one of the parties lobbying to retain the freeholds on their lands, which were stolen centuries ago. Don't believe that line, that they have no power in the House of Lords. Another one asking, and I think probably agree very much with Stephen, why do we need theological understanding in 2024? And why are there still religious people in the Lords? Mary asks.